actually written by one of my all-time favourite authors, so stay tuned to find out which one that is. I will give you a little bit of the background to either the plot or why I chose the book in the first place, then my thoughts on each one, and then finally a rating out of 10. So, let's dive right in. Book 1. So I started off the year, rather fittingly, with a self-development book. I know January is usually a New Year's resolutions kind of a month, so it felt right. And this book is called Never Get Angry Again by David J. Lieberman. I chose this book, to be perfectly honest, because I found myself in a little bit of a phase, and I wanted to read a book that could maybe help lift me out of it. I understand that part of my anger is wrapped up in my grief process, but I also just don't want this to be the new me. So yeah, that's why I chose this book. And to be fair, it starts off really well. Rather than diving straight into anger as an emotion or kind of strategies to deal with it, it actually takes a step backwards and lays the foundation of what is at the root, or what is at the root of the anger. And it's all about how anger can be caused by a lack of self-worth and a lack of self-confidence, and how if you don't love yourself and you don't value yourself, then you just look at the world through a much narrower perspective. You take things more personally, everything is a slight to you and everything is viewed with this negative lens, and so that naturally means that you are more angry as an individual. And to be perfectly honest, it's not something that I had considered, but it made total sense, and I actually really liked that it took that zoom out to focus on that you need to lay that foundation before you can even think of addressing the emotion itself. There are also phrases that the author uses that I really like, or just ways of explaining things. There's a section about boundaries, and he writes, "Good fences make good neighbours," and I really like that, because it's not about shutting people out, but it's about having that boundary to be able to engage when you want to or when it's right, but then also having that ability to draw back and have that limit and that line that people can't cross. I thought that was really clever, and there's quite a few phrases in the book that just explain things so clearly, and I really like that. There's also a bit around when you have an argument or a discussion with somebody and you just can't fathom why they can't see it from your perspective, and he uses the example of when somebody can't speak your language, and some people, instead of trying to explain it in a different way, they just speak louder and slower, thinking that that is going to be the magic key that makes them understand, when they just don't know. And it's exactly the same thing. You can keep saying your point over and over again, but if they don't view it in that way, they're not just going to get it. You have to be able to see it from their perspective. And a huge chunk of the book is about perspective framing. And about understanding that not everybody behaves and thinks in the same way. I would say that is the vast majority of the book. When it finally does get into the anger specific section and the strategies, it kind of, one of the main things it goes over is that anger has 5 main measurable components, and that's frequency, duration, intensity, you may already know, taking time to calm yourself down, breathing exercises, like a gratitude, he calls it a gratitude montage. So instead of writing it down, you have visual aids of what you're grateful for. And I mean, I love a good practical side of things. The theory is great, but I like it when it focuses on what you can do personally. And so yeah, it made some good points there, and I enjoyed that bit. However, I will say that as much as I did enjoy the background setting, it took until I was about halfway through the book for it to actually get on to those strategies that I just mentioned. And I just think it didn't need to take that long to set the scene. I think in the first couple of chapters you pretty much get it, and then you can move into the practical side, because at the end of the day that's why people have picked up the book, or certainly why I did anyways. I think there's only so many times you can be told to work on self-acceptance and self-worth before you're like, yeah, okay, now tell me how. So yeah, that's the first thing. There are also some points that I'm just not sure I agree with, and I think a lot of it is subjective and how you choose to interpret things, but there's a point made in the book where it says that when you're angry, you tend to bump into things a lot more, but he says it's a form of self-harm, of an unconscious form of self-harm, and a way of punishing ourselves. And I just don't think I agree with that. I think, or I choose to interpret it as you're just not thinking clearly because your brain and your body is so riled up in this emotional state. I've read a lot of books about how your body has a physiological response to what you're thinking and feeling. And so for me, that's kind of why you're just not fully aware or present, because you're so in your mind, and wrapped up in your anger. So yeah, I don't necessarily agree with it. And there's also a point later on where it's talking about if you've fallen out with somebody and you're trying to repair the damage of the relationship, and it says to be alert for a life event, like a big life event that may happen for them that will make them more open to reconciliation. So it says like a birth, a death, a wedding, or a divorce, because these big life-altering events help people to see the world better. And I think I have a big issue with that, because it feels disingenuous that you're waiting for something either amazing or terrible to happen to this person. Either way, they'll be feeling a lot more emotionally vulnerable, and it feels like you're just trying to take advantage of that to get what you want, which is your reconciliation and for you to feel better because you've wronged them. I don't think it feels genuine, and maybe you think differently, and maybe I'm just looking at it at too cynical a lens, but I just don't think that point is necessary. There are steps that he outlines to move towards reconciliation. I just don't think that point needed to be in there. And the last point I want to make is that around 30 to 40% through the book, there is a big swing into religion and spirituality. The book does talk about souls pretty much from the off, so maybe I should have taken that as a sign of what was coming. But there is pretty much like a chapter or a section on talking about turning your faith into trust in God, in like almost leaving him to not set the path out, but it talks about how God puts you on a path, and it's almost like your soul's purpose, and so things will naturally come to you. So say if you were destined to be wealthy, that was your like soul's path, things will turn up in your life that could lead you to this author's own personal belief, and that's, again, that there's nothing wrong with it, but personally I just don't know how I feel about this idea that it's already there. Your path is already there. So now, the rating. I gave Never Get Angry Again a 6 out of 10. I don't necessarily agree with some of the points made in the book, as I discussed, which stopped it getting any higher a score. I did think that there, personally for me, were some kind of tidbits and strategies that I would consider. I think they could prove useful, and it was good in my understanding, especially around that point about self-worth. Would I recommend it? Potentially. I don't have many anger books, to be honest, in my repertoire that I can draw a comparison against. So this could be a good starting point for me to go out there and find some other books on anger, and if you yourself have read any, feel free to drop a comment and let me know. Yeah, there's a lot of mid self-development books out there, and so it can be hard to dig through everything. So yeah, if you have any recommendations, let me know. But that is book 1. Moving swiftly on, book 2 is another Kindle classic. And this was a book list book, so this was from the 2018 Goodreads Choice Awards, and this was actually in a category called Best of the Best. And the other list I read in the 2016 list didn't have this category, so, and I don't know if future years have this, or whether this was just that good that it deserved its own category. So I have to say I have very high expectations going into this. And the book is The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. I know there's a film adaptation of this book, I think it's on Disney Plus, but I haven't seen it. And it's a YA novel about a young black girl called Star. And I'm going to read you the blurb. 16-year-old Star lives in two worlds: the poor neighbourhood where she was born and raised, and her posh high school in the suburbs. The uneasy balance between them is shattered when Star is the only witness to the fatal shooting of her unarmed best friend, Khalil, by a police officer. Now what Star says could destroy her community. It could also get her killed. Inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement, this is a powerful and gripping YA novel about one girl's struggle for justice. I have to say right from the jump, this is one of those books that just pulls you in immediately. And it's also one, I knew it from reading the blurb, and then also almost immediately from reading the book, where you know you're going to feel really angry and frustrated on behalf of the main character from what happens to them. You know there's going to be a lot of uncomfortable feelings. And you really do feel for Star, and you feel frustrated, and you feel for her not just because of her grief, but also the situation following the crime. And there's a really powerful quote quite early on in the book, and it says, "People like us in situations like this become hashtags, but they rarely get justice." And I think that's just heartbreaking. It's just crazy to think. I mean, this was probably about 15% through the book, and I was already tearing up, so it really does make you feel so much, which I think is incredible. The book it's so powerful, the writing, to mirror the reality for the black community. There's also a subplot with a gang called the King Lords, and the way it weaves into the story is so well done. It is genuinely one of those books that you just can't put down. You just, once you're in, that's it. Like, clear your schedule. You're not going to want to stop. But I will say, as well as it being like heart-wrenching, there are also some genuinely funny and heartwarming bits in there as well, which I think just speaks to Angie Thomas's skill as a writer. And it is just like all the hallmarks of just a phenomenal book. I just think, to be honest, in general, the book has such a powerful message, and even more so for being aimed at a younger generation. I was going to say in this video that I think it should really be taught in schools just to educate people, but I read online that it had been in America, I would assume, but it was taken away because some people, I don't know if it's been taken away everywhere or if it ever was like I'm not sure how the school system works in America, so feel free to correct me in the comments. I'm just going off what I read, but I read that it was taken away from some schools at least because they feared it would provoke an anti-police mentality. I'm not trying to start anything in the comments, but I do think if that's the only takeaway you got from this book, then I think, one, I feel like you've missed the point, and two, it just shows a lot of ignorance. I think books like this are so important, and I can't stress that enough, and I really do think you should read this book, and I'm sure there are many others. If anybody does have any other recommendations, please do let me know. I'd love to educate myself more as well, so please do share any books that you think would help educate me further. Fiction, non-fiction, I'm open. I mean, from what I've described, I honestly can't fault the book, which is so rare. So when it comes to the rating, I don't think I can think of anything that would mark the book down from anything other than a 10 out of 10. It was a very rare, unputdownable book, but with an incredible, powerful message. And so I can't stress enough that if you haven't read this book, that you do. And I feel like I need to watch the film as well, because I imagine the characters so clearly in my mind that I'd like to see them and see how they're represented on screen as well. So, book 2, a high for January. Book 3 is a little bit of a switch change. We are heading into the personal choice category, and this is the first paperback of the month. It's called favourite type of book. I think the author, Richard Osman, is a fantastic writer. The level of humour in this book is just, it's so good. It really does make you laugh out loud in places. But not only that, but it's just really clever in laying out all of these different plot trails, and it doesn't become so convoluted that you just lose where it's going, or it's really well done. I will say I don't know if the humour is British humour, and if it would appeal wider. I can't speak for other cultures or countries, but give it a go, because I do think it is really funny. I was told before I started this book that the second one was actually better than the first. A few people told me this because the first one is setting up the characters and the backgrounds, so you're getting to know them a bit more, and before it gets into the main plot, whereas in this one, because you already know the main characters, you just almost jump straight in. It's not like it starts off and you're just confused as to who everybody is, but it definitely doesn't go into the individual characters as much, so it moves a lot quicker than book one, which I appreciate personally. I think this is a book series where I genuinely am excited to read the next one. I think there's 2 more, at least at the moment. I don't know what happens in the series, so I don't know if there is more coming. There are more coming. I think I've certainly read some series where I read the next book more out of a sense of obligation than genuine excitement, but it's not the case with this one. So yeah, but I will say I'm going to space out reading the 3rd book in the series, just so you don't get bored about me talking about the same type of books. So I'll leave it as something to look forward to, and you have to stay tuned for future wrap-ups to see me talk about the 3rd and whether it's worth it to continue the series. So, the rating. I haven't really given this book any criticism that would knock it off the highest score. The only thing I can really say is that it wasn't as gripping or like unputdownable as The Hate U Give, and with that getting a 10, it only feels fair that it gets a still very respectable 9 out of 10. If you haven't started reading the Thursday Murder Club series, I do really recommend it. Even as like a holiday read or something to just distract you. Although there are a lot of subplots, I don't think it's something that you really have to like laser focus in. I think you can get the gist. So yeah, highly recommend. And just like that, we've come full circle through the reading process, back into self-development, and also back to my trusty Kindle. So book 4 is the book you wish your parents had read. In previous videos, I mentioned that my husband and I are thinking about starting a family soon. And so I'm trying to incorporate books on parenting into this section. It's kind of to help me or us as a couple understand what we're getting into if we do have children. Although I know nothing prepares you for the real thing, but I think just to also understand the type of parents we want to be as well. The book spends a lot of time talking about the importance of validating your child's feelings rather than reacting to them based on how you are feeling. So if you're tired and you snap at your child, it just asks, so the author, Philippa Perry, she kind of says, just take a second to understand the situation from their viewpoint, because as a child, they're experiencing everything for the first time, or a lot of things for the first time, and so that can be really overwhelming and really overstimulating for them, and they're not at that point where they're able to communicate effectively with you, to tell you what's wrong or how they're feeling. So she kind of just asks parents to just take a step back, remember how they felt when they were a child experiencing this for the first time, and just, I guess perspective framing, to put yourself in your child's shoes, to be able to empathise with them and then address them and talk to them about what they may be feeling, helping them to communicate it clearly, or, if they're too young, just talking them through it, explaining to them, and then helping them to feel like they're supported and nurtured in that moment. She also talks about, really interestingly, about defensiveness as a parent, that sometimes people are so wrapped up in not being labelled as a bad parent that they almost overlook some of the more negative feelings or aspects of their child to try and appear like everything's fine on the surface. So, for example, like ignoring their negative feelings. So, or kind of troublesome behaviours, just to appear like everything's fine and they're not doing anything wrong. And she goes over that, and then how to break down that stigma, I think is the right word. And how to kind of get over that. There are some great chapters in this book, and I think it's pretty much what I've been looking for in reading parenting books. It's, I think some people refer to this as gentle parenting, and I know it's not always looked at in the most positive light. I know there's a lot of cynicism around it, but I do personally believe it's a way to ensure or enable your children to grow up as emotionally intelligent people. I know me and my husband speak a lot about how we are both aware of our flaws, and the chance to be able to grow and nurture another human to avoid those flaws, or to be able to handle them better, I think is just like, what a great chance, and I think people also seem to think that this style of parenting means the child is not disciplined, and it leads to really like bratty behaviour, but she definitely doesn't say you can't discipline your children, but instead of enforcing it, or forcing them to live in your world and your rules, you just understand them as their own individual, and you help them to understand the right behaviours, but just in more of a communicative way, that they then know the rules, boundaries, can set them themselves, and then they also know what's expected of them from other people. The author Philippa also talks about this idea that if you hurt your child, or you say something to them, when I say hurt, I mean like verbally, when you lash out at them, is referred to rupture and repair, and it's having the courage and the strength to be able to admit to your child that you've done wrong, and to be able to own up to it and apologise. It shows them that you are a human, you make mistakes, kids are a little bit older, like, you know, she makes it clear there's nothing bad, you're not a terrible person if you have made these errors. There's always a chance to correct it. Some of the examples she uses are very extreme, and they're real examples, but it's the steps you make beyond that to repair the relationship and to help them understand before they go into adulthood. And you can even continue to repair that relationship into adulthood. It doesn't, there in no way at any point does she say, if you do this or don't do this, you're a terrible parent. She understands everybody is on their own journey, and also as a parent herself, she talks a lot about how even having all this knowledge, it doesn't mean that you're always going to be able to follow through. There are going to be times where you slip up, but it's just how you handle that slip up is what counts. I think there are some points in this book that people could see as quite contentious. I know that when it comes to pregnancy or parenting, people have very strong opinions about the right way to do something. And I know there are multiple schools of thought, and one of the things mentioned in this book is around sleep training. And I know that there is a school of thought of leaving your child to cry it out, especially at night time, so that they don't become too clingy. I think that's the main fear. And Philippa has a very opposite view. In the book she talks about how if a child knows they're going to be left alone with their fear, with their stress, with these big emotions they're feeling because they don't understand, it can make bedtime in future a very stressful affair because the child knows what's coming and they fear it because they don't want to be alone with their feelings. And not just a sense of stress, but also of loneliness, because in their minds they think no matter what, they're going to be alone and no one's going to come and help them. And there's a chance that this goes into how they develop as a person, in that they start keeping all of their fears and their problems to themselves because they think no one's going to come for them, no one's going to help them when they need it the most. And maybe that is a bit extreme, but that is what is laid out in the book. And she instead suggests an alternative strategy to training the child to be more independent as they sleep. She calls it sleep nudging. And she says you only do it after 6 months of age, but it's a much more gentle pace that suits your child. As an individual, has to be very bespoke to them and how they sleep best. So yeah, that was a very interesting section. So there were some great points in this book, and I'm really glad I read it, even though I don't have children at the moment. I do think, as with pretty much most of the self-development books I've read at this point, there's a lot of repetition. I think the first 30%, because I read it on Kindle, is really different ways of saying the same thing. It's about validating your child's feelings. As much as that is fine, when the content is good, which it is, it does then just start to drag the book out a little towards the end. So there is that. There aren't really any points that I strongly disagree with, but then I'm not a parent, so I don't have any reference points. People may violently disagree with this book, some of its points. I don't know how helpful the parents already in the trenches would feel about it. So again, as with any of these books, feel free to let me know. I don't know if they would find it helpful or whether they would feel defensive or feel like they're being preached at, which I know some books can take that kind of tone. But I do think that there are some genuinely good points made. personally to have gained more knowledge and understanding around a section that I have a lot of interest in. Anyways, the rating. I gave this book an 8 out of 10. It was a really interesting read, and I found it really insightful to understand more about the ways in which you can help your child to become emotionally intelligent, and also about them owning their own individuality and not feeling suppressed in any way, which I think is so important. Especially, I'll make myself sound really old now, but like in this day and age with social media, and there's so much pressure on people to, you know, fit into different cliques or whatever, or follow trends. I think the repetition stopped it getting any higher, but I would definitely recommend it to any new or prospective or any type of parent out there. So we've made it to the final book I read in January, which was a personal choice book called Shrines of Gaiety. And it's written by one of my all-time favourite authors, Kate Atkinson. I love her style of writing so much, and as soon as I saw that this had come out, I was straight on my TBR. Sometimes I hold off immediately reading books by my favourite authors, almost to prolong the anticipation. I don't know if anybody else does that. So if you've noticed, it shouldn't actually be in this order. When I was on honeymoon, for some reason my Kindle just would not connect to the internet. We went on a cruise for part of our honeymoon, and my Kindle just would not connect to the ship's Wi-Fi. And although my husband told me, or tried to ban me from bringing too many paperback books, I'm so glad I had this. Otherwise, I would have had to go on cold turkey. Which, for any readers out there, or any cruisers out there, sometimes there's quite a bit of downtime, or can be. We went on a princess cruise, so there weren't any slides or anything like that. So, this book is set in 1926 in London. It does go up north a little, but the central story is in London. And I guess the central character, I guess you could call her, is Nellie Coker, who is a nightclub proprietor who has just been released from prison because she is suspected of having some shady dealings in her nightclubs. And the plot is essentially various attempts to overthrow her from different people, and take all she's got. But there are also other characters in there. So you've got a policeman, you've got a girl who runs away from the north to find her fortune as a dancer in London. You've got an unlikely spy, and then you've also got Nellie's 6 children who are all very different in personality, and they feature quite heavily in the book as well. starts to pick up in pace, and slowly start to be revealed, and then it becomes a book that you don't want to stop reading because you're trying to race ahead in your mind to figure out who's linked to where or what's going to happen. And also I would say that Kate is not adverse to suddenly like killing off a character or plot twists randomly, so it does keep you on your toes, because if there is a character you particularly like, you don't really know what's going to happen to them. And I do really like that, and that's kind of a trend in a lot of her writing, I think. I also really like the historical setting in the book. It's set just after the First World War, and so a lot of the men in the book have either just come back from fighting or didn't fight, and so are viewed in a certain way by the rest of the public. One of the characters was a nurse on the front lines, and so she's been exposed to all sorts of atrocities and awful injuries. And I think it sets really, the way Kate writes, the imagery and the backdrop is really fascinating and really poignant. And it's also, I think, is where the like really stark contrast comes in, because you've got everybody on rations, and the kind of atmosphere in general is quite bleak. In London, you know, a lot of men obviously didn't come back, and so they're trying to deal with that. But then on the other side, you've got Nellie Coker and her string of nightclubs where people kind of drink themselves silly, and there's all sorts of vices in there as well. And there's a comment from one of the characters saying that they would have thought after the war it would have sobered people up and made them more sensible, but actually the opposite has happened, because people now know how precious life is, and they want to live it to the full, and they want excess, and they just want everything. And I found that really interesting contrast. I feel like I'm writing an English essay saying that, but I've just found it really interesting. I'm not gonna lie, I struggled a bit in rating this book. I eventually settled on a 7 out of 10. I was debating giving it an 8, and I did actually originally give it an 8 because I did really enjoy it when the story got going, but I just think it took a bit too long to get there, and ultimately that's knocked it back down to a 7. I think there's just too many, maybe, characters that you're trying to focus on. You know, there's a lot, and I think because the first part of the book needs to set up those characters for you to understand their own plots, and then also how they weave into each other, that just makes it, you know, almost the first half of the book is setting this up, and then the second half is when it all happens. I don't know. So I think that for me is what stopped it getting any higher. Saying that though, I would recommend it, particularly if you do like Kate Atkinson books. It's not her strongest, but it's definitely not her worst either. And on that point, if there are any Kate Atkinson fans out there, what is your favourite, or which is your favourite novel that she's written? There's a book that she's read that is one of, if not my all-time favourite book. But I'm going to do a whole video on my favourite books of all time, so. And that's the lot for January. I think I've mentioned it before, but my target for this year is to read 70 books. I'm actually already behind where I was last year, which isn't great stuff. I read 7 books in January last year and 61 books overall. So I'm hoping I'll pick it up in the months come, and you'll see in future wrap-ups if I actually get there. But we started fairly strong. I mean, the lowest was a 6, and we've already reached the dizzying heights of a 10, so yeah,